रूहों में उतरते हैं सदा मुल्हिम हक के अल्लाह से बंदे को मिला देते हैं रोज़े।
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Ramazan with MTA, a brand new show exclusive to Ramadan on MTA International, where we take you through the days of Ramadan, looking at different elements that affect us in our day-to-day lives, from health to religious discussions, to mental health, to cooking. We bring you a flavour around the world where we speak to different members of our international Ahmadiyya Muslim community family from around the world to give you a bit more of a flavour of what's going on in our day-to-day lives during Ramadan. Let's start today's show with a recitation from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قالت الملائكة يا مريم إن الله اصطفاك وطهرك واصطفاك على نساء العالمين.
And remember when the angel said, O Mary, Allah has chosen thee and purified thee and chosen thee above the women of all peoples.
يا مريم اقنتي لربك واسجدي واركعي مع الراكعين.
O Mary, be obedient to thy Lord and prostrate thyself and worship God alone with those who worship.
Joining me on today's show, we have Ondemand Hadith, who is a missionary of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
So, Ondemand, again, so we know this tilawat has mentioned the life of Hazrat Maryam. What can we learn from the life of Hazrat Maryam, and what kind of lessons can we implement in our day-to-day lives?
So the verses that were just recited are on an important topic because they carry such themes which recur again in the Holy Quran. Later on, of course, there's an entire surah by the name of Surah Maryam. And it seems that the Holy Quran continuously points towards Hazrat Maryam as an individual of inspiration. In fact, in these very verses, the translation, for example, is of verse 43, which was just recited, is, and remember when the angel said, O Mary, Allah has chosen thee and purified thee and chosen thee above the women of all peoples. So whilst commenting on this verse, Hazrat Muslim Maud Radhiyallahu Ta'ala Anhu has explained the fact that this verse doesn't say you make the mention of only one angel. It says when the angels said that. So this verse continuously talks about themes that we can learn from. So Hazrat Maryam's father was someone who dedicated Hazrat Maryam, as we learn from the Holy Quran. And the spirit of waqf, the concept of waqf, begins from her. And the verse after that, verse 44, the translation of that is, O Mary, be obedient to thy Lord and prostrate thyself and worship God alone with those who worship. So we're in Ramadan and there is a natural focus on worship. And the fact that Allah the Almighty has instructed people going back thousands of years to worship God alone is what's being emphasized in this verse.
And you mentioned something about waqf, sacrifice. Now, this is a common theme running throughout the life of Hazrat Maryam, both in her ancestors and indeed the future generations as well. What are some of these instances and how can we learn from this spirit of waqf, which is obviously highlighted in these verses of the Holy Quran?
So waqf is not just a theme, it begins from the time of the prophets, basically, and it's then highlighted in the Holy Quran. But waqf is a recurrent theme even within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And we draw our inspiration from these verses of the Holy Quran. So on the topic of waqf and sacrifice and giving something up for Allah Ta'ala, which is the entire point behind Ramadan, which you remember that the word Ramadan comes from Rams, which means to burn. So this is almost like an annual refresher course, right, that we have to go through. Muslims are encouraged to go through. And we all know the importance of Ramadan. I'm sure it will be repeated continuously throughout the month. So Muslims are encouraged to give up their bad habits, to make sacrifices for Allah the Exalted. There is high amount of emphasis on making financial sacrifices during this month. So all of this points towards something that should make us better as humans. And I believe when we study the case of Hazrat Maryam, this is what we understand. Someone who gave up her life for the sake of Allah the Exalted from beginning to the end. Very interesting. We find in the Holy Quran that ever since Hazrat Maryam was a little girl, she used to astound others around her, right? Through her worship, through her dedication. This is something that we should take with us into Ramadan so that we can better ourselves.
Jazakallah, a very, very interesting discussion and indeed many lessons for us to implement and learn from in our lives as well. Moving on to our next segment, we're looking at the sayings of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God be upon him, the Hadith. Let's have a look at what today's Hadith is.
عن عمر بن الخطاب قال: سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول: إنما الأعمال بالنيات وإنما لكل امرئ ما نوى. Hazrat Umar bin al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, has narrated, I heard the Prophet of Allah, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say, Verily, deeds are judged by the intentions, and for everyone is a reward, according to his intention.
So, Numan, a very fundamental hadith this is. What do we understand from this and how can we learn from this hadith?
So this hadith is the first hadith in Sahih Bukhari. Sahih Bukhari, of course, is the most authentic book after the Holy Quran as it's known. And it is the first among the Sahih Sitta. And this is the very first hadith of Sahih Bukhari. And it kind of draws on the importance of intention. It states, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, right? I think this is probably the first hadith that we all learn as children. And this is something that we ought to carry into adulthood and something that we ought to carry for the rest of our life, especially the lesson behind it. So what does the Holy Prophet ﷺ say? The Holy Prophet ﷺ says, verily deeds are judged by intentions. And the hadith continues, and for everyone is a reward according to his intention. This hadith is quite lengthy. It goes on to explain that someone who migrates for the sake of a material endeavor will reap what he sows. But someone who migrates for the sake of Allah will gain blessings of Allah the Exalted. So I believe when we look at the world today, whether it's our financial life, whether it's our marital life, whether it's political affairs, whether it's just general human interaction as a whole, if we bear in mind that our deeds will be judged and they are in the measure of our intentions, then this is something I think can establish a great amount of peace and harmony in the world, especially within our personal circles as well. Most of the arguments in society, most of the dissension and schisms are because this principle is not borne in mind. So I think we can learn a great amount from this hadith.
Jazakumullah ahsanal jaza. During Ramadan, on this show, we want to give you a bit more of an international flavour, to bring you around the world with us, to meet with members of our worldwide Ahmadiyya Muslim community family. And today we're going to speak to a very dear friend of mine, a Murabbi by the name of Luqman Bajwa, who is posted in Guadeloupe. So we're going to speak to him a little bit about where Guadeloupe is, how the history of the community has developed over the time, and what's been going on in the wonderful country of Guadeloupe. Luqman Sahab, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Murabbi Sahab, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? When did you go to Guadeloupe? And also a little bit about Guadeloupe itself. Whereabouts in the world is it? And tell us a little bit about the country that we're talking about today.
Guadeloupe is located in Caribbean Sea. And, the next big island next to the Guadeloupe in the north is Puerto Rico and Republic of Dominican and Haiti. In the south, we have Martinique, another French island, and St. Lucie, Trinidad, Tobago, etc. The population here in Guadeloupe is just over 400,000. The main population is descendants of slaves imported from Africa. Then in 1854 till 1906, the French government even brought South Indians here. So we have the mainly Africans origins and then some Indians as well here. Although they do not speak Hindi or any other Indian language, they all are French here. They hold French passport. Guadeloupe is a overseas French department. As such, is part of European Union, and we use euro as our currency here. French laws are implemented here as well. Our language is French. They do speak French Creole as well. The main religion as such here in Guadeloupe is Christianity. 95% of people are Christians here. Then we have Hinduism, and Muslims are very few here. I came here in Guadeloupe in 2016 that I was appointed here by Hazur Anwar Aidah Tala bin Nasir Aziz. I was appointed for Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Saint Martin, all three islands which are French here.
And tell us a little bit about the Jamaat in Guadeloupe. How long has it been established for? What kind of things go on usually? Tell us a little bit about the demographic of the Jamaat as well.
As I said, I came here in 2016, and since then the Jamaat was established by the grace of Allah. And now we are a very small community here. But Alhamdulillah, during the pandemic as well, we worked a lot, and this is the year that we had the opportunity to serve the creation of Allah more than any other year before that. The Jamaat is very recent. We are very few members of Jamaat here in Guadeloupe, but we do hold different events by the grace of Allah. In the beginning of this year, 2021, in January, we had our Siratul Nabi Jalsa by the grace of Allah, and we distribute we do humanitarian work as well. We have distributed hot meals, we have distributed food packages to both in their homes or in the homes of needy people and on the street as well. And apart that, we do a lot of tablighi work as well by the grace of Allah.
Another issue, of course, with the pandemic that's ripping through the world, as it were, right now, and with the lockdown being implemented in different shapes and forms across the world. Could you tell us a little bit about how Guadeloupe is managing during this pandemic? You've mentioned already a little bit about the work that you're doing to serve humanity, the Khidmat al-Khalq work. Could you tell us a little bit more about that as well?
By the grace of Allah, here in Guadeloupe, we were, I would say, a little less touched by this pandemic, if I could. In the beginning, we were, of course, confined at our homes, but now the life is beginning to take its roots again. But we, as a Jamaat, by the grace of Allah, we were still utilizing the online means, social media, to spread our message, and apart that, to stay in contact with our members. We have done a few meetings online. We have done a few videos this year for the first time to spread our message to the French and Guadeloupean people here. Apart that, the pandemic itself, the state is managing is quite well here in Guadeloupe.
That was Luqman Bado Saab joining us from Guadeloupe to tell us a little bit about the international Ahmadiyya Muslim family and how it is dealing with Ramadan and indeed, of course, going through this pandemic and lockdown in different ways across the world. It's a fantastic conversation there. Numan Saab, next we're going to be going to our kitchens to see what is being made in our cooking segment. So let's have a look at what's being rustled up today.
Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to cook Colombo chicken curry. This dish is very popular in French Caribbean islands. And in order to prepare this, we have a list of ingredients here that we're going to share with you. First, of course, we have our whole cut chicken over here. Medium-sized pieces. Don't want to go too small because it'll fall apart in the curry. We have fresh coriander. We have green chilies or green peppers. A little bit of rice, which is to be mixed in the spices that we're going to grind. We have fresh thyme here, and it has a very beautiful smell. Of course, fresh garlic, we'll be using that. We have tomatoes, about 1 cup or just under 1 cup of oil, lime. Here in the spice box, we have whole black pepper, cumin seeds, coriander powder, which is coarse grind. We have some red chili pepper, turmeric powder, and salt, of course. We have some coconut milk, which is one of the key ingredients that goes into Colombo chicken. Let's start off by mixing our spices. First, we're going to take a little bit of rice. In this case, we'll do 3. Very interesting because in a lot of spices, when they're mixed together, rice is not one of the ingredients that is mixed along with the spices. I'm going to take a little bit of black pepper, to 1 teaspoon. Here we have some clove. I'm going to put some clove in there. A little bit more on the cumin seeds since they add a lot of flavor. So 2 teaspoons. We'll also do about 2 to 3 teaspoons of coriander powder. And salt, pepper, and turmeric we'll save for later. We're going to take this and bring it right over here to our little coffee grinder. And we're going to give it a shake so it just sinks to the bottom. And these spices, we're going to pour them right on top of the chicken. Now in this mixing bowl, we are going to add a few other things, which is turmeric powder. We're just going to take 1 teaspoon, sprinkle it on top, some salt, 2 teaspoons should be more than enough, but it's something that can always be added on. And we're going to give it a good mix so all the spices get absorbed into that chicken. There we are. Okay. And then we'll come back to it in about 10 minutes. Okay, so while our chicken is being marinated, we're going to go ahead and get some of the other things ready. For example, we're going to take 3 tomatoes. We're going to slice them once, twice, and put them aside. Now your tomatoes do not have to be finely diced. Next, we will need about 4 green chilies. So we'll take 4 nice green ones. With these chilies, we're not going to cut them small. We're just going to split them down the middle like this. So we just open them up. And next, we're going to take some fresh thyme and we'll cut this portion off and just cut it in half. One more thing we need to add in there is a little bit of fresh garlic. Peeled garlic, put it here. 4. There. That's it. Now we're ready to go back to the chicken. Okay, so our oil is ready. So we're gonna take small portions and we're gonna gently stir fry it. Perhaps half will be all right, and then in the second round we can do the other half. Okay, so as you can see, we've cooked this one side for about 2 minutes, and you could see the color has started to change. And now we're going to cook it from the other side for about 2 minutes. So now we're going to gently and carefully pick up the chicken. And it is okay if the oil goes in there, because at the end, once this is done frying, we are going to take this oil and we're going to pour it right in the saucepan to let it help with additional cooking. So now that our chicken has been stir fried and it's in our pot here, We're going to take these ingredients. We have tomato, chilies, garlic, and all of this. We're going to pour this in that chicken right there. And on high heat, we're going to just give it a quick mix. So we've cooked it on high heat for about 5 minutes. Now we're going to cover it and let it cook for about 10 more minutes. Here we are. I'm going to take a quick peep, and if you look inside this, you'll see that now you could see a little bit of gravy, water that chicken has released, and also the tomatoes that we had put in there have almost completely been dissolved. We're going to take some lime and we're going to squeeze that in there. Need a little bit of strength for this. And we're going to add our final ingredient, which is coconut milk. And then we're going to pour this in there. So this is just over a cup, so about 1.5 cup. After we have added that in there, we're going to give it a stir, cover this again, and let it cook for about 5 minutes, and we will be done. Here we are. This is exactly the consistency we're looking for. It's a creamy sort of texture, not too watery and not too thick, and it is fully ready. At this point, we're going to turn off the heat and we're going to plate it, garnish it, and we'll show you the final product. What we're going to do is garnish it a little bit. So we're going to take a little bit of this coriander. We're just going to sprinkle it on top. And as far as the green pepper, personal preference, but when you're serving it, just to add some greenery, a couple of these green peppers here, and we have our dish ready. So this is how we prepared this dish. It's called Colombo curry chicken, and hopefully you can try this at home and enjoy this dish. Jazakallah for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
A very interesting segment there. And again, I'm sure people watched that with a lot of interest, courtesy, of course, from our wonderful US studios. Numan, the next segment that we're going to be talking about is the book segment. Of course, people during lockdown have had a lot more time to delve into books and actually try to take out some of those beautiful treasures from our spiritual trove of literary resources. So what we're going to do is every day we're going to bring you a new book. Let's have a look at what the book is for today.
The Conditions of Bed and Responsibilities of an Ahmadi. This is a book which compiles various sermons by Hazrat Khalifa Masih V, may Allah be his helper, where Hazur went through every single condition of bed set out by the promised Messiah والسلام, and explained how they apply to every Ahmadi and what Ahmadis should do to fulfill them. And Hazur explains throughout this book how each and every condition is very strongly grounded in Islamic teachings. So throughout the book, Hazur will go through every single part and discuss it in light of Hadith, the verses of the Holy Quran, and the writings of the promised Messiah ﷺ. So for example, in condition 2, the promised Messiah ﷺ says that every Ahmadi should keep away from mischief. And under this, Hazur gives a hadith, the writings of the promised Messiah ﷺ as well. The promised Messiah ﷺ says, "Do not engage in fighting or discord with those who leave you, because you have joined a movement established by Allah the Almighty. Instead, pray for them in secret, that Allah Almighty may grant them the insight and cognition that He has granted you. With your pious example and good behavior, prove that you have adopted the right path." So throughout the book, these quotations from the writings of the Prophet Messiah ﷺ are present, and one really understands in depth what the 10 conditions of bed really mean. And in the book, Hazur also gives the examples of those people who took bed at the hand of the Prophet Messiah ﷺ, and the revolution which was created within them as well. So for example, discussing tahajjud Hazur talks about how the atmosphere was in Qadian and how the Sahaba would get up for tahajjud and spend their nights offering prayers to Allah the Almighty as well. So this is a very important book, especially in this blessed month, the holy month of Ramadan, where we can really start to understand what the 10 conditions of bay'at mean and also begin to implement them in our lives.
A beautiful and in-depth look there into this fascinating book. Numan Sahab, can you tell us a little bit more about this book and how can we learn from it in our day-to-day lives?
So this book, I think, is very important, and it should be something that should be on every Ahmadi shelf. It's a reflection of who we are and what we should inspire to become. It really is the identity of Ahmadi Muslims. It's based on the Friday sermons of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, and it looks at the conditions of bay'at. In fact, recently in a virtual mulaqat with Hazrat Khalifatul Masih, a question was asked that if we identify as Ahmadi Muslims, then why do we need to do bay'at? And the answer that Hazur gave was very beautiful. He said that when you're doing bay'at, when you enter the fold of the community, you in essence accept the conditions that the promised Messiah, والسلام, the founder of the community, laid down. And those conditions are nothing against the teachings of Islam. They're enshrined in the Holy Quran and they're taken from the teachings of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. So this book is something that we should continuously reflect on. We should, in one place, in fact, the promised Messiah ﷺ stated that the 10 Sharait Bay'at, or the 10 conditions of Bay'at, should be in every Ahmadi's home, simply because this is who we are as Ahmadi Muslims. If someone asks you, why are you an Ahmadi? Then you should be able to say, I am an Ahmadi because firstly, I believe that there is no God other than Allah, and that the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the Khatam al-Nabiyyin and is the seal of all prophets. Secondly, I believe in this. Thirdly, I believe in this. And this is something that's, very important, especially something that should be instilled in our younger generations and our youth.
I think it's a very apt way of putting it. It's a reflection of who we are, and it's almost like a charter of what we believe in and why we believe in it. A very interesting discussion there. Moving on to our next segment, we, in this show, want to discuss all of the different aspects that we can feel and that we go through and that we experience. Of course, during pandemic, there has been a huge rise in mental health issues and a lot of discussion about our mental well-being and how we can ensure that our mental well-being is in the best state possible. Of course, worry and anxiety and doubts and pressure is something that we all feel in our day-to-day lives. It can be about any number of things. But what happens when those pressures and that anxiety and that doubt starts to overcome who we are and starts to inhibit the way that we act in our day-to-day lives? To help us understand a little bit more on this subject, we're speaking today to Sarah Wasim Saiba, who is a clinical psychologist for the NHS, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how we can cope with the issue of crippling doubt. Assalamu alaikum, Sarah Saiba.
Wa alaikum salam.
When we have these kind of issues that come up and it becomes almost impossible for us to operate on a day-to-day basis with these doubts and these anxieties, what can we do to help and to alleviate and to remedy this situation?
Well, yeah, the question with worrying is that it's often not very constructive. So my first tip is to try and address your worry in a constructive and purposeful way. I would suggest people trying to set up a worry slot. By that I mean choose a time and a place for your constructive worrying. It should be the same every day. So you might decide to be in the living room, say between 5 and 5:20. Don't choose a slot that's too close to bedtime because that's going to make you feel anxious and then it'll affect your sleep. Okay, so you've set up your worry slot. Now, during your worry period, you're allowed to worry about whatever's on your mind, but the rest of the day is a worry-free zone. So if during the day an anxious thought or worry comes into your head, just make a brief note of it and then continue with your day. Remind yourself that you'll have time to think about it later, so there's no need to worry about it now.
I see. And you mentioned this concept of the worry slot. What do we actually do in this worry start? How can we practically go about making sure that this helps us on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so now it's time for your worry slot. What do you do? Well, first of all, you need to write down your worries. The advantage of writing them down means that you then have to address the actual problem in a realistic way. So I suggest you go over your worry list that you've made during your worry period. If the thoughts you wrote down are still bothering you, then allow yourself to worry about them, but only for the amount of time you've specified in your worry period. So in this example, it will be no more than 20 minutes. My second tip is to distinguish between what are solvable and unsolvable worries. So by solvable worry, I mean something that's got a potential solution. For example, you may be worried that you can't pay your debts. It's solvable because there are things you can do. Like, for example, you could call up the bank or the people you owe and check out if there are any payment options. You could talk to debt counsellors who can help you work out a payment programme. Unsolvable worries, however, are those that there's no corresponding action. So, for example, I might worry about, what if I get cancer one day? Or when will the pandemic end? Or is World War III going to happen? These aren't solvable worries. I don't know if I'm going to get cancer. And we don't know for sure when the pandemic's going to end. So worrying about these isn't going to lead to easy solutions. They can't be solved. So my suggestion is invest your energies instead on those worries that are solvable. So start to make a list of possible solutions, all possible solutions, and then narrow down that list to those actions that will make a change. For example, when I talk about worries about debt, I would suggest making a list of all the things you can do. You might think about taking on extra work. You might think about getting advice from a professional who can handle debts. Focus on the things that you have the power to change rather than those circumstances or realities beyond your control. When you've evaluated your options, then make a plan of action. Write down where, when and how you're going to do this. For example, if you decide that the best way to solve your debt problem is to get extra work, then how will you do it? Will you get a second job? Will you take on extra shifts at your work? Or you might decide you're going to talk to your bank manager. Well, when will you do that? Are you going to do that on Friday or Monday? So you basically make a plan of action.
And often we come across these worries that no matter how much we think about them and no matter how much we plan to try and solve them, quite simply, they are too either abstract or too big for us to be able to deal with. Say for something big, like many people are talking about a worry of, say, World War III, something that they can't physically impact at all. What would be the solution for these kind of worries?
Yes, the question when will World War III happen is not a solvable worry in itself. We don't know for sure. So with some worries, we need to allow ourselves to live with that uncertainty. Worrying about those kinds of worries won't make them happen or make them not happen. And if you're a chronic worrier, the vast majority of your anxious thoughts will probably be in this camp. Worrying is often the way we try to predict what the future has in store in order to prevent unpleasant surprises and control the outcomes. The problem is it doesn't work. Thinking about all the things that could go wrong doesn't make life any more predictable. So focusing on worst-case scenarios will only stop you enjoying the good things you have in the present. I suggest instead think about the likely risk of that feared event happening. If the risk is high, then think about the things that might be in your control. We can't control world events directly, but as our beloved Khalifa has suggested and reminded us several times, we can pray for good outcomes. Let's take another unsolvable worry, for example. When will the pandemic end? Well, inshallah, very soon, but that's not in our direct control. So ask yourself if anyone really knows the answer. So I suggest talk to other people, ask them how they would deal with this worry. You know, it's really important to ask yourself also, what are you stopping yourself from doing by holding on to this worry? What opportunities might you be missing out on because you're spending so much time thinking about this unpredictable event? Ask yourself, what is the probability that what I'm scared of will actually happen? If the probability is low, what are some more likely outcomes? And ask yourself, most importantly, is this a helpful thought? How will worrying about it help me? And how will it hurt me? What would I say to a friend who had this worry? If the likelihood's very low, then ask yourself, is it possible to live with a small chance that something negative may happen? I hope you find this helpful. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Sarah Saiba. Again, that was Sarah Wasim Saiba, a clinical psychologist with the NHS, telling us a little bit about worry slots and how we can help to alleviate the pressure of these crippling doubts and anxieties that we are all encountering and experiencing in our day-to-day lives. A wonderful discussion. Jazakallah to Numan Hadi Sahab for shedding some light on these very important topics. Jazakallah to everyone at home. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
रूहों में उतरती है सदा मुहिम हक के अल्लाह